nanny answered a call in Russian near a Millionaire. The next morning, she was fired, but what happened next left him completely shocked. The morning light filtered through the grand windows of the Carter mansion, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Elena Morozov moved silently through the corridors, her footsteps barely audible as she carried a breakfast tray meant for 6-year-old Sophie. 3 years had passed since she'd first stepped into this imposing Boston estate. Yet Elena still felt like a ghost in these halls, seen, but never truly acknowledged. "Sophie, sweetie, time for breakfast," Elena called softly, her American accent carefully practiced, masking any trace of her Russian origins. The little girl's face lit up when Elena entered. Sophie's golden hair caught the sunlight, reminding Elena painfully of her sister Marina. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same bright blue eyes, the same dimple when she smiled. "Elena, did you make pancakes with faces?" Sophie bounced on her bed, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. "Of course I did," Elena replied, setting down the tray. "Mr. Pancake is especially happy to see you today," while Sophie giggled and dug into her breakfast. Elena tidied the room, stealing glances at the child who had no idea they shared the same blood. Every moment with Sophie was both a blessing and torture, a constant reminder of what Elena had lost and what had been stolen from her. "Daddy's having important people for dinner tonight," Sophie announced between bites. "Mommy says I have to wear the blue dress and be super good." Elena nodded, her mind flashing back to 6 years ago, when the Morozov empire crumbled overnight. The memories came in violent bursts, the frantic call from her father warning her to run, the news reports of the tragic accident that claimed her parents' lives, the whispered rumors of her uncle Leonid's betrayal. While the world believed the entire Morozov family had perished, Elena had escaped with nothing but the clothes on her back and the family heirloom, a small ruby ring hidden in her shoe. "Miss Morozov." Sophie's voice pulled her back to reality. The little girl sometimes used Elena's surname, a small slip-up Elena had made early in her employment, too dangerous to correct. "Yes, sweetie. Why do you look sad sometimes when you look at me?" Elena froze, then quickly composed herself. "Do I? I'm not sad. I'm just thinking about the day ahead. Mommy says thinking too much gives you wrinkles," Sophie reported solemnly. "Your mother has a lot of opinions," Elena replied, keeping her voice neutral despite the surge of anger she felt whenever Rebecca Mason Carter was mentioned. The sound of heels clicking against marble announced Rebecca's approach. Elena straightened her plain uniform and stepped back from Sophie's bed, assuming the deferential posture expected of household staff. Rebecca paused at the doorway, her designer outfit impeccable, her auburn hair styled in an elegant bob. At 37, she looked like she belonged on a magazine cover, not like someone who had participated in the destruction of an entire family. "Sophie, darling, don't forget you have piano lessons after school." Rebecca barely acknowledged Elena's presence. "And Elena, Mr. Carter needs you to stay late tonight. We're entertaining important clients." "Yes, Mrs. Carter." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly as they always did when looking directly at Elena. "You know, there's something about you I can't quite place." Elena kept her expression blank. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Just an observation." Rebecca's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sophie, finish your breakfast. The driver leaves in 20 minutes. After Rebecca left, Elena helped Sophie get ready for school, each gesture filled with the tenderness she couldn't openly express. The investigation had taken nearly everything Elena had: money, time, identities created and discarded, but it had led her here, to Sophie. The private investigator had tracked down records of a baby girl born to Marina Evans, the same day Marina Morozov had supposedly died. The trail had led straight to Rebecca Mason, then an interpreter who had worked with several Russian businesses, including Leonid Morozov's growing empire. "All done," Sophie announced, twirling in her school uniform. "Perfect." Elena smiled, swallowing back the lump in her throat. "Now, remember what we practiced yesterday?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "Пожалуйста and спасибо, please and thank you in Russian." "Excellent," Elena whispered, her heart swelling. These little lessons were dangerous indulgences, but she couldn't help herself. Our little secret, right? Later that afternoon, Elena dusted the bookshelves in Julian Carter's office, a room she normally avoided. The 45-year-old business tycoon spent most days at his downtown office, but today he was working from home, his presence filling the spacious room with tension. Julian Carter had built his technology empire from scratch, his ruthless business acumen making him both admired and feared in corporate circles. He barely noticed Elena as she moved around the edges of the room. "The Anderson contract isn't acceptable in its current form," Julian snapped into his phone, his voice sharp. "They either agree to our terms or we walk." Elena kept her gaze down, but her ears caught every word. Information was currency in her world now. The strident ring of her cell phone cut through the silence. Elena fumbled to silence it, her heart racing. Cell phones were supposed to be kept off during work hours, a rule she'd never broken before. But Nick, her only ally from her former life and her family's ex-security chief, would only call if it was critical. Before she could silence it, Julian looked up, irritation clear on his face. "Take that outside," he ordered. Elena nodded apologetically and stepped into the hallway, but not before the screen flashed the name Nikolai in Cyrillic letters. A mistake in her haste to set up the new burner phone. "Da," she answered in a whisper, forgetting herself in her nervousness. Nick's voice came through, urgent and rushed. "I found them, Elena. The original documents. The bastard kept copies as insurance." Elena's pulse quickened. "You're certain they're authentic?" "Absolutely. His signature, the altered clauses, everything that proves he falsified the transfers. I also found references to the Mason woman, payments, correspondence. She was deeper in this than we thought. Where are you now?" "Secure location. I'll call back with details on the transfer." "Be careful, Nick, he has eyes everywhere." Elena ended the call, only to turn and find Julian Carter standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. How much had he heard? Her mind raced through possibilities. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the interruption." She slipped back into her American accent. Julian studied her face. "That wasn't English you were speaking." "No, sir. It was Russian. A call from my cousin back home." Something shifted in Julian's eyes. Suspicion. Perhaps curiosity. "I wasn't aware you were Russian, Elena." It didn't seem relevant to the job application. She forced a smile. "My family immigrated when I was young." Julian nodded slowly. "I see. Well, as I said, please keep personal calls for your break time." "Of course it won't happen again," as Julian returned to his office. Elena released a shaky breath. For 3 years, she'd maintained her cover flawlessly. Now one phone call threatened everything. She needed to be more careful. Sophie's future, and justice for the Morozov family, depended on it. That night, as Elena tucked Sophie into bed, the little girl clutched her hand. "Elena, will you always be my nanny?" Elena's throat tightened. "I'll always be here for you, one way or another," she promised, knowing it might be a promise she couldn't keep. As Sophie drifted to sleep, Elena stood by the window, watching the stars appear one by one. Tomorrow, she would check in with Nick about the documents. Soon, she would have everything she needed to reclaim her inheritance and her niece. But first, she had to survive the growing suspicion of Julian Carter, a man who had built an empire by sensing when something wasn't quite right, and something in his house was definitely not what it seemed. Elena's hands trembled as she folded the last of her clothes into a small suitcase. Less than 24 hours had passed since the phone call in Julian's office, but the consequences had arrived with stunning swiftness. Rebecca had cornered her this morning, her voice dripping with false concern. "Elena, we need to talk." Her manicured hand had gripped Elena's arm just a bit too tightly. "Julian and I feel it's time for a change. Your services will no longer be required after today. No explanation, no real notice, just termination, effective immediately." Elena had maintained her composure, nodding mechanically while her mind raced. 3 years of careful planning, of building trust with Sophie, of gathering information, all potentially wasted because of one phone call. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Sophie standing there, tears streaming down her face. "Is it true? Are you leaving?" The little girl's voice cracked. Elena knelt down, her heart breaking. "Yes, sweetheart, I have to go. But why? Did I do something wrong?" "No, no," Elena whispered, pulling Sophie into a hug. You did nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't make sense. Sophie clung to her. I don't want another nanny. I want you. Every instinct in Elena screamed to tell Sophie the truth, that they were family, that she would come back for her. Instead, she gently wiped the child's tears. I'll always care about you, Sophie. And maybe someday, we'll see each other again. Promise. I promise, Elena said, meaning it more than Sophie could understand. Sophie. Rebecca's sharp voice echoed down the hallway. Come away from there at once. The girl stiffened, then reluctantly pulled away. I made this for you, she whispered, pressing a folded piece of paper into Elena's hand before running off. Elena closed the door and unfolded the drawing. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Me and Elena was scrawled in Sophie's uneven handwriting. Elena carefully tucked it into her inner pocket, close to her heart. 30 minutes later, she walked out of the Carter mansion for what she hoped would not be the last time. Neither Julian nor Rebecca came to see her off. Only Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, offered a stiff goodbye as the taxi pulled away. Elena caught a glimpse of Sophie's small face pressed against an upstairs window. Where to, miss? The driver asked. Elena hesitated. She had contingency plans, of course. A small apartment across town under a different name. Emergency funds hidden in various accounts. But now she needed something more. She needed legal help. Downtown, please. The Harrington Building. Matthew Brooks reviewed the draft contract on his desk with increasing frustration. Corporate acquisitions always brought out the worst in people. Hidden clauses, deliberately vague language. Financial sleight of hand, at 38, he'd spent 15 years practicing international business law and still found himself amazed by human greed. His assistant buzzed through the intercom. Mr. Brooks, there's a woman here without an appointment. She's quite insistent on seeing you. Matthew sighed. Name. She says to tell you it's about the Morozov case. His interest peaked instantly. The Morozov collapse had been one of the most controversial business scandals in recent years. A Russian energy empire that imploded amid accusations of fraud and family betrayal. He'd followed it closely, even written a legal analysis for a business journal. Send her in. The woman who entered his office wasn't what he expected. Dressed simply in jeans and a modest blouse, she carried a small suitcase and had the wary look of someone who hadn't slept. Mr. Brooks, thank you for seeing me. Her voice carried the barest hint of an accent. My name is Elena Morozov. Matthew's eyebrows shot up. Morozov, according to public record, all the Morozovs died 6 years ago. Not all of us. She sat down, her posture straight despite her obvious exhaustion. And I need your help to prove it. For the next hour, Elena laid out her story. The systematic destruction of her family, her escape and years in hiding, the discovery that her niece was alive, seemingly adopted by an American couple, her infiltration of the Carter household, and now, her abrupt dismissal just as critical evidence had surfaced. Let me get this straight, Matthew said when she finished. You believe Julian Carter's wife was complicit in your uncle's takeover of your family's company, and somehow ended up with your sister's child. I don't just believe it. I can prove parts of it. Elena reached into her bag, producing a file. Financial transfers from offshore accounts linked to my uncle to Rebecca Mason, dated 6 years ago. Records showing Rebecca worked as an interpreter for my uncle during the same period the fraudulent documents were created. And most importantly, birth records showing Marina Evans, an alias my sister would have used, giving birth to a daughter the same day Sophie Carter was supposedly born. Matthew examined the documents, his legal mind already cataloging their admissibility and implications. This is compelling, but not conclusive. And there's a bigger problem. Statute of limitations on some of these financial crimes, jurisdictional issues between Russia and the US, and the fact that you've been essentially spying on this family for 3 years. I'm not concerned about the legal niceties, Elena said sharply. I want my niece back. And I want justice for my family. The law is made of legal niceties, Miss Morozov. Matthew leaned forward. And if you want my help, we do this legally. No shortcuts. Their eyes locked in silent challenge until Elena finally nodded. Fine, but we don't have much time. Once my uncle realizes I've been discovered, he'll move to eliminate any remaining evidence. And possibly me. Is he really that dangerous? Elena's laugh was hollow. My uncle orchestrated the accidental deaths of my parents and brother, forced my sister to flee the country, and stole billions in assets. What do you think?" Matthew considered her words carefully. Throughout his career, he'd developed a knack for spotting lies. Something in Elena's story rang true. The details were too precise, her emotional reactions too authentic to be fabricated. "I'll need more than what you've shown me," he finally said. "Hard evidence of the document falsification, proof of your identity, and something concrete linking your sister to Sophie Carter. My contact is securing the falsified documents as we speak. As for proof of my identity," she slipped a ruby ring from her finger. "This has been in my family for generations. Check the inside band, the Morozov crest, and my initials. And for Sophie," she hesitated, "I need access to her, or at least her medical records. A DNA test would be conclusive. Getting access to a child's medical records without parental consent is nearly impossible. Then we need to make Julian Carter doubt his wife enough to look into it himself." Elena's eyes gleamed with determination. "He struck me as a man who values truth, despite his other flaws." Matthew studied her face. The firm set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the subtle signs of grief etched around her mouth. He couldn't deny he found her compelling, and not just her case. "This won't be easy," he warned, "and it will be expensive. Money isn't an issue. I still have access to accounts even my uncle doesn't know about." Matthew made his decision. "All right, Ms. Morozov, I'll take your case." He extended his hand. "But full transparency from now on. No more secrets." Elena hesitated before shaking his hand. "Please call me Elena and Mr. Brooks. Thank you." "Matthew," he corrected with a slight smile. "If we're going up against one of Boston's wealthiest families and a Russian oligarch, I think we can skip the formalities." As Elena left his office, Matthew found himself staring at the ruby ring she'd left for authentication. He'd just taken on what might be the most dangerous case of his career, and he wasn't entirely sure why. Professional curiosity, justice, or was it the flash of vulnerability he'd glimpsed beneath Elena Morozov's carefully controlled exterior? Whatever it was, he had a feeling both their lives had just changed irrevocably. Julian Carter stared at the document on his desk, his mind refusing to process the implications. The private investigator he'd hired had been thorough, completing in 3 days what would take others weeks. The manila folder contained everything about the woman who had been Sophie's nanny: passport records, employment history, educational background, all fabricated with remarkable skill. Elena Porter didn't exist before 3 years ago, but Elena Morozov did. "Jesus Christ," Julian muttered, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. The photographs made it undeniable. The young woman smiling at charity galas in Moscow was undoubtedly the same person who had quietly moved through his home for years. A presumed dead heiress to one of Russia's largest energy conglomerates had been making pancakes for his daughter. His cell phone buzzed. "Rebecca." "Yes," he answered, his tone neutral. "Just checking if you'll be home for dinner?" Rebecca said. "I'm planning that salmon you like." Julian's gaze drifted to another document in the folder. A wire transfer receipt. Sender, L. Morozov Holdings. Recipient, Rebecca Mason. Amount, $2,500,000. Date, 6 years ago. "I'll be late," he replied. "Don't wait up." Before Rebecca could respond, he ended the call. The Pi had flagged other transactions, other connections. Rebecca had worked as an interpreter for multiple Russian companies between 6 and 8 years ago, including Leonid Morozov's expanding business interests. Julian opened his desk drawer and removed the photograph he kept hidden there. Sophie as a newborn, nestled in Rebecca's arms in the hospital. He'd always treasured it as the moment his family was complete. Now, he studied it with new eyes. Noting Rebecca's awkward hold on the baby, the strange tension in her smile, he picked up his phone again and dialed his most trusted associate. "Frank, I need something handled discreetly. A DNA test." "You actually got hired by the Morozovs once." Elena leaned forward in Matthew's office, where they'd been working for days on building their case. Matthew nodded, organizing documents across his desk. "Just once, about 8 years ago. Basic contract work for their American investments. I met Alexei Morozov briefly. Your father, I presume." "Yes." Elena's expression softened momentarily. "What was your impression of him?" Shrewd businessman, spoke excellent English, seemed genuinely interested in his employees' welfare, which was unusual for oligarchs in that era. That sounds like him. Elena smiled faintly. He insisted I learn 5 languages before I was 16, said understanding people in their own words was the key to both business and peace. Matthew observed the brief vulnerability in her expression before she composed herself again. These rare glimpses into her true personality had become increasingly fascinating to him. "I've been meaning to ask," he said. "Why did you wait 3 years to make a move? Why not approach me sooner?" Elena sighed. "I needed irrefutable evidence. Living in their house, I could gather information, build Sophie's trust, and wait for my contacts to find the original documents. A premature legal battle would have been disastrous." She paused. "And truthfully, I wasn't sure who I could trust. My family's downfall taught me that loyalty is easily purchased. Not everyone's loyalty is for sale," Matthew said quietly. Their eyes met briefly before Elena looked away. "Let's hope Julian Carter feels the same way about truth." Matthew nodded, returning to the documents. "Speaking of Carter, my contact at the hospital confirmed he's ordered a DNA test." "Already?" Elena's eyebrows rose. That was faster than expected. Apparently, he requested their most expedited service. "Results should be ready tomorrow." Elena stood and walked to the window, tension visible in her shoulders. "Then we need to be ready to move when he gets those results." "Elena," Matthew said carefully, "have you considered what happens if the test shows Sophie is actually Rebecca's biological child? Your entire case falls apart." "That's impossible. Sophie is Marina's daughter. I'm certain of it. How can you be so sure the resemblance could be coincidental?" Elena turned, her expression fierce. "Because my sister called me the night Sophie was born. She was terrified, hiding in a small apartment in Brighton. She'd just gone into labor and was afraid Leonid's men had found her." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was on a flight from Paris trying to reach her. By the time I arrived, the apartment was empty, with signs of a struggle. The landlady said a woman had been taken to the hospital. I checked every hospital in the area, but no Marina Evans was ever admitted." Matthew frowned. "And you believe Rebecca somehow took the baby?" "I do now. She was in Boston at that time. I've confirmed it. And she suddenly took a leave of absence from her job, claiming pregnancy complications. When she returned 3 months later, she had a newborn daughter." Elena's hands clenched. "I spent 3 years searching for any trace of Marina or her child before the lead finally brought me to the Carters." The office phone rang, interrupting them. Matthew answered, listening intently before thanking the caller and hanging up. "That was my source at Westlake Labs," he said. "Julian Carter just received the test results." Julian sat alone in his car in the Westlake Labs parking lot, the sealed envelope on the passenger seat feeling like it might spontaneously combust. For 10 minutes he'd been unable to open it, his hand shaking each time he reached for it. The rational part of his brain told him this was absurd. Rebecca was Sophie's mother. He'd been there for the pregnancy, the birth, the sleepless nights. He'd watched his wife's body change, had attended doctor's appointments, hadn't he? With sudden clarity, Julian realized he'd never actually been in the examination room. Rebecca had always insisted on privacy, claimed it made her uncomfortable to have him there. The specialist had been Rebecca's choice, someone she claimed was highly recommended, and those months when she'd withdrawn from public life due to complications. Had he ever actually seen her unclothed during that time? "Enough," he muttered, grabbing the envelope and tearing it open. The clinical language swam before his eyes until he reached the conclusion. The alleged mother, Rebecca Mason Carter, shows no genetic markers consistent with maternity of the subject, Sophie Carter. Probability of maternity, 0%. Julian felt the world tilt beneath him. He flipped to the second page. The alleged father, Julian Carter, shows multiple genetic markers consistent with paternity of the subject. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. The implications crashed through him like a physical blow. Sophie was his daughter, but not Rebecca's. A memory surfaced. A brief affair during a business trip to St. Petersburg 6 years ago. A beautiful woman with laughing eyes and an infectious smile. Marina. Something. They'd spent just 3 days together before Julian returned to Rebecca. Consumed by guilt, he'd never known Marina was pregnant, had never imagined she might have had his child. And Rebecca, what had she done? How had she ended up with his biological child? passing it off as her own. Julian started the car, his mind racing. He needed to confront Rebecca, but not yet. First, he needed more information about Marina, about Elena Morozov, about the tangled web that somehow connected them all to his daughter. He pulled out his phone and dialed his PI again. "I need everything you can find on Marina Morozov, sister of Elena, and I mean everything." As Julian drove away from the lab, he was unaware of the black sedan pulling out behind him, or the man inside reporting his movements to Leonid Morozov's security team. The circle was closing, faster than anyone realized. St. Petersburg. 6 years ago, the winter light spilled through the tall windows of the Mariinsky Theater's Grand Hall, catching in Marina Morozov's hair as she laughed. Julian Carter couldn't take his eyes off her. She moved with an effortless grace that made the other attendees of the international business reception seem stiff and awkward in comparison. "You're staring again, Mr. Carter," Marina said, approaching him with 2 champagne flutes. Her English was flawless, with just enough of an accent to make ordinary words sound like poetry. "I apologize," Julian replied, accepting the drink. "It's just that you expected all Russian energy executives to be grim men with thick mustaches." Her blue eyes sparkled with mischief. Julian laughed. "Something like that. I didn't expect the Morozov Group's head of international development to be female, under 40, capable of smiling." She clinked her glass against his. "My father believes in challenging expectations." That conversation had led to dinner, which led to a walk along the snowy banks of the Neva River, which led to 3 days that Julian had locked away in the furthest corner of his memory. 3 days of connection that felt more real than the 10 years of his increasingly hollow marriage to Rebecca. When it ended, they'd both known it could never be more. Julian had his life in Boston, his company, his responsibilities, and Marina had made it clear that her family's business was her priority, especially with tensions growing between her father and uncle over the company's future direction. They'd parted with a kiss in the lobby of his hotel. No promises made. Julian had returned to Rebecca, determined to make his marriage work, to forget the Russian woman with the infectious laugh. He never knew that those 3 days had created a child. Julian paced the length of his home office, memories of Marina crashing through the careful barriers he'd built. The P's report sat on his desk, a devastatingly comprehensive account of Marina Morozov's final months. Shortly after their affair, the Morozov family had been torn apart by scandal and death. Alexei and Vera Morozov, along with their son Mikhail, had died in what was officially ruled a yacht accident off the Italian coast. The company had fallen into the hands of Leonid Morozov, Alexei's brother. Amid rumors of corporate espionage and betrayal, Marina had disappeared, reportedly fleeing Russia with only what she could carry. The last confirmed sighting placed her in Boston 6 years ago, pregnant and terrified. According to a witness statement buried in an immigration case file, Julian sank into his chair, the weight of understanding crushing him. Marina had come to Boston carrying his child. Somehow, Rebecca had discovered this, possibly through her work as an interpreter for Russian businesses, and then Marina had vanished. While Rebecca suddenly had a baby she claimed was theirs. The door to his office opened, and Rebecca entered without knocking, elegant as always in designer loungewear. "You've been avoiding me for days," she said, her voice a practiced blend of concern and irritation. "What's going on, Julian?" He studied his wife of 16 years, searching her face for signs of the woman he thought he'd married. How had he never noticed the calculation behind her eyes? "I've been busy," he replied evenly. "The Novotech acquisition has complications." Rebecca nodded, accepting the excuse. "Well, don't forget the Hammonds' dinner party tomorrow. And Sophie's been asking for you." She paused. "She's still upset about that nanny leaving. I'm interviewing replacements tomorrow." Julian felt a surge of anger, but kept his expression neutral. "I'll speak with Sophie before bedtime." Rebecca lingered. "Is there something else bothering you? You seem distant?" For a moment, Julian considered confronting her right then, demanding to know what she'd done to Marina, how she'd taken another woman's baby. But the strategist in him knew better. Rebecca was dangerous when cornered, and he needed to understand the full scope of her deception first. "Just work stress," he lied. "I'll be fine." After Rebecca left, Julian turned to the window, his reflection ghostly against the darkening sky. The man staring back at him was a stranger, someone who had failed to see the truth in his own home for 6 years. The chime of his phone interrupted his thoughts. A text from his PI. Found something at the Carter house. Need to meet immediately. Elena and Matthew hunched over Rebecca's bank statements in his office, searching for patterns in the transactions. There, Elena pointed. 3 days after Marina disappeared, a cash withdrawal of $50,000. Matthew nodded. And here, a deposit to a private medical facility specializing in maternity care. She bought my niece, Elena said, her voice hard, like she was purchasing a designer handbag. Matthew placed a gentle hand on her arm. We don't know exactly what happened yet. Let's not jump to conclusions. Elena looked up at him, momentarily distracted by the warmth of his touch. Over the past week, their professional relationship had developed an undercurrent that neither acknowledged openly. Late nights, poring over documents, shared meals as they strategized, moments when their eyes met a beat too long. It was becoming increasingly difficult to focus solely on the case. What would you call it then? She asked, pulling her arm away before Matthew could answer. His assistant knocked and entered. Package for Miss Morozov. Courier said it's urgent. Elena accepted the envelope cautiously. Inside was a single key and a note. Storage Unit 342. Bayside Facility. The evidence you need. Nick, she breathed. He's found something. 30 minutes later, they stood before a small storage unit in a nondescript facility near the harbor. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside was a single cardboard box. Elena opened it with trembling hands to find a stack of papers and a sealed envelope marked, "For Marina's sister." These are the original documents, she said, examining the papers. The real transfer agreements Leon had altered. She passed them to Matthew, who began scanning them with a lawyer's precision. These would hold up in court, he confirmed. The discrepancies between these and the filed versions are obvious once you see them side by side. Elena opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small flash drive. Nick says he's gone into hiding, she said, skimming the letter. Leonid's men almost caught him. He's left everything we need to prove the fraud. She connected the flash drive to her phone. Financial records, email correspondence between Leonid and his conspirators, and, she stopped, her face paling, voice recordings of Rebecca Mason discussing payment for her services. What services exactly? Matthew asked. The letter doesn't say, but there's something else. Elena pulled out a folded piece of paper from the envelope. An address where Nick believes Rebecca has kept personal items related to. To Marina. You mean like a trophy collection? Matthew looked disturbed. Or evidence she couldn't destroy but was too dangerous to keep at home. They locked the storage unit, Matthew carefully securing the documents in his briefcase. As they walked to the car, Elena felt a strange prickling sensation on the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. Matthew, she said quietly, don't look around, but I think we're being followed. Are you sure? 6 years in hiding teaches you to recognize surveillance. She casually took his arm, as if they were a couple. Black sedan, 2 cars back. It's been with us since we left your office. Matthew's arm tensed under her hand. What do we do? Act normal? Let's get back to your office. Safer there. As they drove away, Elena watched the sedan fall in behind them, maintaining a careful distance. Leonid's reach was extending closer, which meant they were making progress, but it also meant the danger was growing, back at Matthew's office. As they examined the documents more carefully, Elena came across a folded paper tucked between legal agreements. Her hand froze as she recognized her sister's handwriting. Matthew, she whispered. Look at this. It was a letter, never sent, addressed to Julian Carter. Julian, it began. By the time you read this, our daughter will be born. I never told you about the pregnancy because I knew your situation was complicated, but now I fear for our safety. My uncle has done something terrible to my family. If anything happens to me, please find our child and keep her safe. Her name will be Sophie, after our grandmother, with love, Marina. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She tried to reach him, she whispered. She wanted him to know. Matthew's arm slipped around her shoulders, offering silent comfort. And now he does, he said quietly. The question is, what will Julian Carter do with the truth? Leonid Morozov swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, watching the Boston skyline from his penthouse suite at the Ritz-Carlton. At 63, he had perfected the art of patience. Power came not from rushed action, but from waiting for precisely the right moment to strike. His phone rang, the secure line used only by his most trusted operatives. "Report," he answered curtly. "The niece is making progress," said the gravelly voice of Dmitri, his head of security. "She accessed a storage unit today with her lawyer. We believe they've obtained documents." Leonid's face remained impassive, though his grip tightened on the glass. "And the package that fool Nikolai sent her. We weren't able to intercept it. They have it now. What about Carter? He's been investigating too. Hired a private detective, ordered DNA tests. He knows the child isn't his wife's." Leonid walked to the window, considering the implications. Elena had been a persistent thorn in his side for years, always staying just beyond his reach, somehow surviving despite the considerable resources he'd deployed to eliminate her. Now she was closing in on the evidence that could undo everything he'd built. "It's time we spoke with Mr. Carter," Leonid decided. "Arrange a meeting. And the niece." Leonid's thin lips curved into what might generously be called a smile. "Let's see what Carter does first. If he's smart, he'll understand that his business interests align with ours. And if he doesn't, then we remove all obstacles at once, permanently." Leonid ended the call and returned to contemplating the cityscape below. How fitting that the final act of the Morozov drama would play out in America, land of reinvention and second chances. Elena had certainly embraced that spirit, transforming herself from privileged heiress to determined avenger. He had to admire her tenacity, even as he planned her demise. Julian Carter stepped into the private dining room at Menton, instantly assessing the man who rose to greet him. Leonid Morozov was leaner than his photographs suggested, with sharp, calculating eyes that evaluated Julian with equal intensity. "Mr. Carter, thank you for agreeing to meet on such short notice." Leonid's handshake was firm, his accent refined. Julian nodded curtly. "Your invitation was intriguing." They sat at the elegantly set table, a waiter immediately appearing to pour wine. Julian declined, opting for water instead. He needed complete clarity for this conversation. "I understand congratulations are in order," Leonid said once they were alone. "The Novatech acquisition positions Carter Technologies excellently in the renewable energy market. You didn't request this meeting to discuss my business portfolio," Julian replied evenly. Leonid smiled. "Direct, I appreciate that." He leaned forward slightly. "We have a mutual concern, Mr. Carter. My niece Elena has developed an unhealthy fixation on your family." Julian's expression remained neutral, despite his surprise at Morozov's directness. "Is that so?" "She suffered a psychological break after her parents' tragic accident," Leonid continued smoothly. "Developed elaborate conspiracy theories, became obsessed with the idea that her sister's child was somehow stolen." "And what does this have to do with me?" "Elena was your daughter's nanny, Mr. Carter. Elena Porter, I believe she called herself." Leonid observed Julian's reaction carefully. "She's now working with a lawyer named Brooks, preparing to make absurd claims about your wife and daughter." Julian took a sip of water, buying time to process this confirmation of what he already suspected. "If these claims are so absurd, why are you concerned?" "Because even false accusations can damage reputations. Your company is publicly traded. Mine has sensitive government contracts in multiple countries." Leonid spread his hands. "A scandal benefits neither of us. What exactly are you proposing?" Leonid signaled the waiter to serve their first course, waiting until they were alone again before continuing. "A mutually beneficial arrangement. Carter Technologies has been seeking entry into Eastern European markets. My companies have the connections you need. Together, we could form a partnership worth billions. In exchange for your assistance in resolving this Elena situation quietly. Specifically, I need access to any evidence she may have provided you or law enforcement." Julian maintained his poker face. Though internally his mind raced, Leonid was essentially confirming every suspicion, offering a bribe to cover up his crimes. "That's an interesting proposal," Julian said carefully. "I'd need time to consider the implications." "Of course," Leonid nodded, "but not too much time. I'm only in Boston until the end of the week. After that, events may take on a momentum of their own." The threat was thinly veiled. Julian recognized the tactics. He'd used similar pressure in his own business dealings, though never involving threats of violence. "I'll have an answer for you in 48 hours, Julian said, rising from his seat. Despite the untouched food, Leonid remained seated, entirely comfortable with the power dynamic. "One more thing, Mr. Carter. Your wife's involvement in this situation is complex. Before making any decisions, I suggest you ask her about a certain apartment in Brighton 6 years ago." Julian's hand tightened on the back of his chair. "I appreciate the suggestion." As he walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, Julian pulled out his phone and dialed his security chief. "Frank, I need you to do something immediately. Place our insurance files in the secure location we discussed, and start monitoring all communications to and from my wife's devices." He ended the call and stared up at the night sky, momentarily overcome by the magnitude of what he was facing. Every certainty in his life was crumbling. His marriage was built on lies. His daughter was not who he thought she was. And now he was being pulled into a dangerous game by one of Russia's most notorious oligarchs. For Sophie's sake, he had to navigate this perfectly. "He met with Leonid," Elena said, pacing Matthew's office. Her source at the restaurant had texted her immediately after seeing Julian and Leonid together. "This changes everything." Matthew looked up from Marina's letter, which he'd been analyzing for potential legal uses. "Not necessarily. Carter might be gathering information. Or being bought off," Elena countered. "My uncle didn't build his empire by lacking persuasive skills. Julian Carter's net worth is over $3 billion, Matthew pointed out. "He's not easily bought. Everyone has a price, it's not always money." Elena stopped pacing, her expression troubled. What if Leonid threatened Sophie? Julian would do anything to protect her. Matthew stood and approached Elena, daring to place his hands on her shoulders. "You need to trust me on this. From everything we've learned about Carter, he values truth and integrity. He's investigating his wife, ordered DNA tests, hired private investigators. Those aren't the actions of someone willing to cover up crimes." Elena looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I've spent 6 years trusting no one," she said quietly. "It's a hard habit to break." "Try," Matthew said, his voice gentle. "Starting with me." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings that had been building for days. Slowly, hesitantly, Elena leaned forward until her forehead rested against his chest. Matthew's arms encircled her, offering comfort without demand. "We need to move quickly," she murmured against his shirt. "If Julian hasn't already been compromised, he will be soon. Leonid never leaves loose ends." Matthew nodded, his chin brushing the top of her head. "I've prepared preliminary legal documents. We could approach Carter directly, show him what we have, including Marina's letter." Elena pulled back slightly to look up at him. "It's risky if he's already aligned with Leonid. We'd be exposing ourselves. Sometimes the direct approach is the least expected." Matthew's hands moved to gently frame her face. "You can't hide forever, Elena." The vulnerability in her eyes nearly undid him, for a woman who had survived so much. She carried her wounds with remarkable grace. Before he could reconsider, Matthew lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. A question more than a demand. Elena froze for a moment, then answered by rising on her toes to press her mouth more firmly against his. The kiss deepened, years of loneliness and fear momentarily forgotten in the simple human connection. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Elena stepped back, her professional mask slipping back into place despite the flush in her cheeks. "We'll contact Julian tomorrow," she decided. "But first, we need to secure everything we have. If Leonid's watching him, he's definitely watching us." Matthew nodded, struggling to refocus on the case. "I'll arrange a secure location for our meeting, somewhere neither Leonid nor Rebecca would anticipate." As they returned to their work, the lines between personal and professional irrevocably blurred, both pretending the moment hadn't fundamentally changed their relationship. But in the back of their minds, a new possibility had taken root, one where justice might be accompanied by something neither had been looking for: a future together. Rebecca adjusted her diamond earrings in the bedroom mirror, her reflection betraying none of the panic churning inside her. 6 years of careful planning was unraveling at an alarming rate. First Elena's unexpected appearance as their nanny, then Julian's increasing coldness, and now whispers that Elena Morozov was in Boston. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Running late. Start dinner without me." Another excuse. Another night of avoiding her. Rebecca wasn't stupid. She recognized the signs of a husband who'd discovered something devastating. The question was, how much did he know? She stepped into Sophie's bedroom, where the girl sat at her small desk, coloring intently. "Sweetheart, what are you drawing?" Rebecca asked, her voice artificially bright. Sophie didn't look up. "It's for Elena." Rebecca's smile froze. "Elena isn't coming back." "Darling, we've discussed this." "She will," Sophie said with the absolute certainty only a child could muster. "She promised." Rebecca moved closer, looking over Sophie's shoulder at the drawing. It showed 3 figures: a small girl with yellow hair, a tall woman with dark hair, and another woman with light brown hair. The resemblance to Sophie, Elena, and Marina was unmistakable, despite the childish rendering. "Who are these people?" Rebecca asked, her throat tight. "That's me," Sophie pointed. "That's Elena, and that's the lady in my dreams." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What lady?" Sophie shrugged. "She talks to me sometimes when I'm sleeping. She says she's watching over me." She looked up at Rebecca with Marina's blue eyes. "She has the same color hair as me." "It's just a dream," Rebecca said sharply, then forced herself to soften her tone. "Finish up, then get ready for bed. We have the big charity gala tomorrow, and you'll be staying with Mrs. Peterson." As she turned to leave, Sophie's voice stopped her. "Mommy, why does Daddy look sad when he looks at me now?" Rebecca swallowed hard. "Daddy's just busy with work. He loves you very much." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Of course, Julian was looking at Sophie differently. He'd discovered she wasn't Rebecca's biological child. The question was whether he'd made the connection to Marina Morozov. Yet, Rebecca returned to her bedroom and opened her hidden safe, removing a small key. Tomorrow's gala would host the city's elite, including several potential escape routes in the form of men who'd been pursuing her for years, if things deteriorated further. She needed options and leverage. It was time to visit her security deposit box. The contents would destroy lives, but they might save hers. "You're sure this is the right play?" Matthew asked, watching Elena select a gown from the options laid out in her apartment. "The Carter Foundation Gala is the perfect opportunity," Elena replied, holding up a midnight blue dress against herself. "Public enough to prevent any immediate threats, private enough for meaningful conversation. And you don't think showing up at an event hosted by the family you're investigating might seem confrontational?" Elena smiled grimly. "Confrontation is inevitable at this point, better on ground of my choosing." She disappeared into the bathroom with the dress, calling over her shoulder. "Besides, my invitation is legitimate. Your firm donated to their foundation last year, which makes you, as partner, an invited guest, and I'm your +1. Matthew couldn't argue with her logic, though the risk still concerned him. The gala would bring together Boston's most influential families, several international business figures, and, most concerning, likely both Julian and Rebecca Carter in the same room. Elena emerged in the blue gown, the transformation striking. Gone was the modest nanny or the casual investigator. In her place stood the true Elena Morozov, poised, elegant, and unmistakably aristocratic. "You look," Matthew trailed off, searching for an adequate word. "Like myself," Elena finished for him. For the first time in years, she turned to check her reflection, adjusting the sapphire pendant at her throat. Another Morozov family piece she'd kept hidden until now. "Will Julian recognize me as his daughter's nanny?" "Absolutely," Matthew said. "But that's not a bad thing. We want him off balance." Elena nodded, her expression determined. "We need 10 minutes alone with him. Enough time to show him Marina's letter and outline what we know about Rebecca's involvement. And if Rebecca intercepts us first, we adapt," Elena said simply. "I've survived this long by being prepared for contingencies." She opened a drawer and removed a small recorder. "Everything we say will be documented." Matthew moved behind her, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "I've filed preliminary injunctions under seal with the court. If anything goes wrong tomorrow, the documents go public automatically." Elena turned to face him, her expression softening. "You've thought of everything." "I try," he said, tentatively reaching for her hand. "Elena, when this is over," She pressed a finger to his lips, shaking her head. No promises or plans yet. Not until Sophie is safe and Leonid is exposed. Matthew nodded, understanding her caution even as he hoped for more. Then let's make sure we succeed. Julian reviewed the security arrangements for the gala one final time. The annual Carter Foundation event was always highly orchestrated, but this year he'd added extra measures. Additional security personnel, restricted access to certain areas, and surveillance of every entrance and exit. "Sir, about the guest list," his chief of security said, pointing to a name on the tablet. "Matthew Brooks, from Harrington Legal. He's confirmed attendance with a +1. Julian studied the information. Brooks, the lawyer Elena Morozov had retained. This was no coincidence. "Flag them for observation, not intervention," Julian instructed. "I want to know when they arrive and their movements throughout the evening." "And Mrs. Carter?" Julian hesitated. Rebecca had been acting strangely all week, making unexplained trips, having hushed phone conversations, and spending unusual amounts of time with Sophie. His surveillance had revealed a visit to a bank downtown, though what she'd accessed remained unknown. Continue monitoring discreetly, he decided. No direct engagement unless she attempts to leave with Sophie. After his security team departed, Julian opened his desk drawer and removed Marina's letter, which his PI had discovered hidden in a carved box in Rebecca's closet. He'd read it dozens of times now, each reading deepening his anger and regret. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Daddy," Sophie called through the door. Julian quickly tucked the letter away. "Come in, sweetheart." Sophie entered in her pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. At 6, she was already showing signs of the woman she would become. Thoughtful, observant, with flashes of a spirit that reminded him painfully of Marina. "Are you working again?" she asked, climbing onto his lap without invitation. "Just finishing," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" Sophie nodded against his chest. "I had a bad dream. Want to tell me about it?" She looked up at him, her blue eyes serious. "There was a man with a scary smile. He was trying to take me away, but then the lady with yellow hair like mine saved me." Julian's heart stuttered. "What lady?" "Sophie. The one who talks to me in my dreams sometimes. She says she's my guardian angel." Sophie yawned. "She looks like me, but grown up." Julian held her tighter, overwhelmed by the thought that somehow, impossibly, Marina's spirit was watching over their daughter. "No one's going to take you away," he promised fiercely. "I won't let that happen." "I know," Sophie said simply. "That's what Elena always said too." Julian froze at the mention of the nanny. "What exactly did Elena tell you?" "That she'd always protect me, no matter what." Sophie's eyes were already drifting closed. "She promised we'd see each other again." Julian sat with his sleeping daughter for a long time, pieces falling into place. Elena Morozov, Marina's sister, had infiltrated his household to be near her niece. Not to harm Sophie, but to protect her. The realization shifted his perspective dramatically. Tomorrow at the gala, he would need to make crucial decisions about whom to trust and how to proceed. Rebecca was clearly involved in something sinister. Leonid Morozov was dangerous and manipulative, and Elena, the woman who had cared for his daughter while hiding her true identity, might actually be his strongest potential ally. As Julian carried Sophie back to her room, he noticed a drawing on her desk. 3 figures holding hands. A child, a woman with dark hair, and a woman with blonde hair. Something about the simple image struck him deeply. The family that might have been, if fate and human cruelty hadn't intervened. He tucked Sophie into bed, then returned to his office to make one more call, this one to a contact at Interpol, whom he'd been cultivating since discovering the first threads of this conspiracy. "It's Carter," he said when the call connected. "I'm ready to move forward with what we discussed tomorrow night." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "All assets are in position. We'll be ready." Julian ended the call, a sense of grim determination settling over him. The gala would appear to be a celebration of philanthropy and social connection. In reality, it would be the battlefield where the future of the Morozov legacy and his daughter's safety would be decided once and for all. Chandeliers cast a golden glow over the ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, where Boston's elite mingled in a symphony of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. The annual Carter Foundation Gala was the city's premier charity event, raising millions for children's education, while providing the perfect stage for power brokers to form alliances behind champagne smiles. Julian Carter stood near the main entrance, mechanically greeting guests while scanning the crowd. Rebecca was across the room, resplendent in a crimson gown that matched the rubies at her throat, charming a group of potential donors. To anyone else, they looked like the perfect power couple. Successful, generous, untouchable. Only Julian knew it was all crumbling beneath their feet. "Mr. Carter, wonderful event as always." Julian turned to find Lawrence Hammond, head of Boston's largest investment firm, offering his hand. "Lawrence, glad you could make it," Julian replied automatically. "I was just speaking with Elena Morozov," Hammond said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Quite a coup getting him to attend. The Russians aren't usually big on American philanthropy." Julian's attention sharpened. "Leonid is here already." Hammond nodded toward the bar. "Arrived about 10 minutes ago. Seems quite interested in your clean energy initiatives." Julian excused himself and moved through the crowd. Hyper-aware of the security personnel positioned throughout the ballroom, Morozov stood conversing with the mayor, looking perfectly at ease in his bespoke suit, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. Their eyes met across the room. Leonid raised his glass in a subtle toast, his message clear. "Your move." Julian's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his head of security. "Brooks and guest have arrived." Elena stepped from the limousine, Matthew's steadying hand at her elbow. The evening air carried the first hints of autumn, a sharpness that matched her mood. She'd spent the day preparing, mentally reviewing every detail they'd uncovered, physically transforming herself into the woman she truly was. "Ready?" Matthew asked quietly, his eyes taking in her complete metamorphosis from the humble nanny to the Russian heiress. Elena nodded, squaring her shoulders, her. After 6 years, more than ready, they ascended the steps, joining the queue of glittering guests. As they approached the entrance, Elena felt a familiar prickle of awareness. They were being watched. A discreet scan confirmed her suspicion. Security personnel positioned at strategic points, some openly in hotel uniforms, others attempting to blend with the crowd. "Julian's increased security," she murmured to Matthew. "Something's happening tonight besides fundraising." Matthew squeezed her hand. "Stay focused on our objective. 10 minutes alone with him." They presented their invitations and stepped into the opulent ballroom. Immediately, Elena spotted Rebecca Carter holding court among admirers, her laugh carrying across the room with practiced charm. The sight of the woman who had stolen her sister's child made Elena's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral. "There's Julian." Matthew nodded toward their host. "And is that—" "My uncle," Elena confirmed, her voice dropping to a whisper as she glimpsed Leonid across the room. "I didn't expect him to be so bold." "This complicates things," Matthew said, guiding her toward the champagne table to avoid immediate detection. "If Leonid's here, he's planning something." Elena accepted a flute of champagne, using it to shield her face as she observed the room. "We need to approach Julian before Leonid realizes I'm here." As if sensing their discussion, Julian turned in their direction. For a moment, his expression remained composed. Then recognition dawned in his eyes as they locked with Elena's. 6 years had changed them both, but not enough to erase the months she'd spent caring for his daughter. Julian excused himself from his current conversation and began moving deliberately in their direction. "He's coming to us," Matthew murmured. "Follow my lead." Rebecca laughed at a joke she hadn't really heard. Her attention divided between maintaining her socialite facade and tracking Julian's movements across the ballroom. When she saw him change direction suddenly, she followed his gaze to a striking couple near the champagne table. The woman in midnight blue looked vaguely familiar. Rebecca studied her more carefully, noting the aristocratic posture, the sapphire pendant, the dark hair swept into an elegant updo. Then the woman turned slightly, her profile coming into view, and Rebecca nearly dropped her champagne. Elena, not the modest nanny, but Elena Morozov in her true form. Rebecca's mind raced. If Elena was here, openly showing herself at the gala, she must have gathered enough evidence to make her move. The man beside her, Rebecca recognized him from photographs her private investigator had shown her, was Matthew Brooks, one of Boston's top lawyers specializing in international law. They were here for a confrontation. Rebecca slipped away from her group, moving toward the private office Julian maintained at the hotel for foundation business. She needed to access her contingency plan immediately. "Mr. Brooks, I don't believe we've met formally," Julian said as he approached, his voice perfectly modulated for a social setting, despite the tension crackling between them. "And your guest is... I think you know exactly who I am, Mr. Carter," Elena replied softly, "though you knew me by a different name." Julian's expression revealed nothing to casual observers, but Elena caught the tightening around his eyes. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My office is just down the hall." As they followed Julian, Elena spotted Rebecca slipping away in the opposite direction. She nudged Matthew, who nodded slightly. He'd seen it too. Julian's private office was elegantly appointed. With floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston's skyline, he closed the door behind them, then turned to face Elena directly. "Elena Morozov," he said. "Or should I call you Elena Porter, my daughter's nanny for 3 years. I did what was necessary to protect my niece," Elena responded, refusing to apologize. "Sophie is Marina's daughter, my blood, and mine," Julian said, the words hanging heavily between them. Elena studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. "You know, DNA tests confirmed it last week. I've been piecing together the rest." Julian moved to his desk, unlocking a drawer. Including this, he withdrew a familiar envelope and extended it to Elena. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it, recognizing Marina's handwriting immediately. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "Hidden among Rebecca's possessions. She never delivered it to me." Julian's voice was tight with controlled fury. "I would have known the truth 6 years ago if she had." Elena opened the letter, though she already knew its contents from the copy Nick had provided. Seeing her sister's actual handwriting brought a fresh wave of grief. "We have more evidence," Matthew said, placing his briefcase on the desk. "Financial transactions between Leonid Morozov and Rebecca Mason, original documents proving the fraudulent transfer of Morozov assets, and witness testimony placing Rebecca at the apartment where Marina was last seen alive." Julian's face darkened. "You're saying Rebecca was directly involved in Marina's disappearance?" "We believe so," Elena confirmed, "though we're still establishing exactly what happened that night." Julian was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications. "I've been in contact with Interpol," he finally said. "They've been building a case against Leonid Morozov for years. Financial crimes, industrial espionage, suspected involvement in several deaths. I've been feeding them information since I discovered the first connections to my wife." Elena exchanged a surprised glance with Matthew. "You're working with law enforcement, since when?" "Since I realized my daughter's safety was at stake." Julian's expression softened slightly. "Sophie has been having dreams about Marina, describing her in detail, though she's never seen a photograph. It's like some part of her remembers." The revelation touched Elena deeply. "Marina always said our grandmother had the sight. Perhaps it runs in the family." "We don't have much time," Julian said, glancing at his watch. "Leonid approached me with a business proposition, essentially a bribe to keep quiet about everything. I've been pretending to consider it while working with Interpol. Tonight is the culmination of that operation." "What's going to happen?" Matthew asked. "When I give the signal, federal agents will move in to arrest Leonid on multiple charges." Julian's expression hardened. "But Rebecca is also implicated. And right now, she's..." The door burst open, cutting him off. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her face contorted with rage, a small pistol gripped in her right hand. "You treacherous bastard," she spat at Julian. "After everything I've done for you?" Elena tensed, positioning herself between Rebecca and the others. "It's over, Rebecca. We know everything. About Marina, about Sophie, about your deal with Leonid." Rebecca's laugh was brittle. "You don't know anything. You think this is about money, about a child. It's so much bigger than that." She gestured with the gun. "All of you, move. We're going to join the party. Nice and calm. Leonid's waiting, and he has a car ready." "You can't escape," Julian said, his voice steady despite the weapon pointed at them. "The building is surrounded by federal agents. Then we'll need insurance, won't we?" Rebecca's smile was terrible. "Sophie is already on her way to meet us." "What have you done with my daughter?" Julian's voice was deadly quiet, his entire body rigid with restraint. Rebecca gestured toward the door with the pistol. "She's with Dmitri. If we're not at the service entrance in 5 minutes, they leave without us." Her crimson gown caught the light as she moved, the color suddenly reminiscent of blood. "Now move." Elena exchanged a quick glance with Matthew, a silent communication passing between them. Whatever plan they'd had for the evening was now irrelevant. Sophie's safety was all that mattered. "Rebecca, think about what you're doing," Elena said, stepping forward cautiously. "There's no scenario where you escape clean from this. Kidnapping a child crosses a line that even money can't erase." "Shut up," Rebecca hissed. "You don't get to lecture me. You have no idea what I've sacrificed. To steal another woman's child?" Elena's voice sharpened. "What kind of sacrifice is that?" Rebecca's laugh was hollow. "Is that what you think happened? That I saw a baby and decided to take it?" She shook her head. "I was just the cleaner. Leonid's people had already dealt with Marina. The baby was collateral damage, meant to disappear too." Julian made a strangled sound. "You're saying Leonid had Marina killed?" "Not personally," Rebecca replied with chilling detachment. "But yes, Marina knew too much about the Morozov family business dealings. When she ran, she took documents with her, evidence of Leonid's criminal activities. He couldn't risk those becoming public." Elena felt the world tilt beneath her. For 6 years, she'd imagined her sister dying in childbirth, perhaps from complications or inadequate care. The truth, that Marina had been murdered, was both worse and somehow what she'd always feared in her darkest moments. "So you took her baby," Matthew said, his lawyer's mind continuing to gather facts even in crisis. "Why not just follow Leonid's orders?" Rebecca's eyes flickered to Julian. "Because I saw an opportunity. Julian had been desperate for a child. I'd been faking a pregnancy to keep him interested. And suddenly there was this baby, the right age, looking enough like me to pass." "You monster," Julian whispered. "I saved her life," Rebecca snapped. "Leonid would have had her killed otherwise. I created a perfect life for her, gave her everything. Except her mother," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You kept her from her real family." A commotion from the ballroom interrupted them. Raised voices. The sound of glass breaking. Rebecca tensed, waving the gun more urgently. "That's our cue. Leonid's men are creating a distraction. We need to move now." She forced them into the hallway, keeping the gun concealed against the folds of her gown. The corridor was deserted, the party guests drawn to whatever chaos was unfolding in the ballroom. As they approached a service door, Julian suddenly slowed his pace. "Rebecca, if it's money you need, I can arrange." "It's too late for deals," she cut him off. "The only thing that matters now is getting out of the country. Leonid has a plane waiting." Elena's mind raced. If they reached that service entrance, Sophie would be gone, spirited away to some country with no extradition, raised by criminals. She couldn't allow that to happen, not after coming so close to reuniting what remained of her family. "I'm not what you think," Rebecca continued, an edge of desperation entering her voice. "I cared for Sophie. I protected her. When I found out Julian was her biological father, I made sure she stayed with him." "How noble of you," Elena said bitterly, "kidnapping a child and lying to her for 6 years." They reached the service corridor, a dimly lit passageway lined with storage rooms and maintenance closets. At the far end, a red exit sign glowed above a metal door. "Almost there," Rebecca murmured, more to herself than her captives. The door opened before they reached it. A large man in a dark suit appeared, his hand resting casually inside his jacket where a weapon undoubtedly waited. Behind him, looking tiny and confused, stood Sophie in her pajamas and a hastily donned coat. "Mommy," she called, her voice small and frightened. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," Rebecca called, her tone jarringly normal. "We're going on a trip." Sophie's gaze moved past Rebecca, widening as she recognized the others. "Elena," then with growing excitement. "Elena!" Before anyone could react, Sophie broke free from the man's loose grip and ran forward, not toward Rebecca, but directly to Elena, wrapping her arms around her legs. "You came back. I knew you would." The moment of distraction was all Julian needed. He lunged for Rebecca. Grappling for the gun, Matthew moved simultaneously, charging toward Leonid's enforcer who was now drawing his weapon. Elena instinctively shielded Sophie, turning her body to protect the child as chaos erupted. The sharp crack of a gunshot echoed in the narrow corridor, followed by a woman's scream. Julian staggered back, red blooming across his white shirt. Rebecca stood frozen, the gun still in her hand, her expression one of shock rather than intent. The second man, Dmitri, now had his weapon fully drawn, aiming it directly at Elena and Sophie. "Enough," a commanding voice called from behind them. Elena turned to see Leonid Morozov standing at the corridor entrance, flanked by 2 more guards. His expression was one of controlled fury. "This has become unnecessarily messy," he said, stepping forward. "Dmitri, secure the child. We're leaving." "No." Elena pulled Sophie closer, her eyes frantically searching for options as Julian sank to his knees. One hand pressed against his bleeding chest. Matthew had been subdued by one of Leonid's men. A gun pressed to his temple. Rebecca seemed to have withdrawn into herself, staring at Julian with a stricken expression. "Uncle?" Elena addressed Leonid directly, drawing herself up with all the aristocratic bearing of the Morozov heritage. "This ends now. Federal agents are already moving in. You'll never get off American soil." "My dear niece," Leonid replied with cold amusement, "you severely overestimate American law enforcement. My contacts assure me we have a clear exit route." He gestured to Sophie. "The child comes with us. She's a Morozov, after all." "She stays with me," Elena said fiercely. Julian, despite his wound, struggled back to his feet. "She's my daughter," he gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. "You'll take her over my dead body." "That can be arranged," Leonid said calmly, nodding to Dmitri, as the enforcer raised his weapon. Julian summoned his remaining strength and threw himself forward, not at Dmitri, but at Leonid himself. The 2 men crashed to the floor, Julian's larger frame momentarily pinning the older Russian. "Run!" Julian shouted to Elena. "Get Sophie out now!" Elena didn't hesitate, scooping Sophie into her arms. She bolted for a side door Matthew had indicated earlier during their review of the hotel's layout. Behind her, she heard more gunshots, a man's cry of pain, and the sound of approaching sirens. Matthew broke free in the confusion, knocking his captor off balance with a desperate elbow strike. He caught up to Elena as she fumbled with the door handle, Sophie clinging to her neck. "This way," he urged, helping them through. Service stairs to the kitchen, then out through the delivery entrance. As they fled, Sophie looked over Elena's shoulder. "What about Daddy?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. Elena couldn't answer. The image of Julian, bleeding and surrounded by Leonid's men, was seared into her mind. He had sacrificed himself for his daughter, for Marina's daughter. A man she had judged so harshly had, in the end, proven himself worthy of her sister's love. They burst into the hotel kitchen, startling the staff, and continued toward the delivery doors. Outside, red and blue lights flashed as police cars and federal agents swarmed the building. "FBI," a voice shouted as they emerged. "Hands where we can see them." "We have the child," Matthew called back, raising his hands while Elena set Sophie down but kept her close. "Sophie Carter, she's safe. But Julian Carter is inside, shot, with Leonid Morozov and his men." The agents moved quickly, some securing them while others rushed into the building, as one agent wrapped a shock blanket around Sophie's shoulders. The little girl looked up at Elena with Marina's blue eyes. "Is my daddy going to die?" she asked with a child's direct simplicity. Elena knelt beside her, brushing a strand of blonde hair from her face. "Your father is very brave," she said, her voice breaking. "He loves you very much." As federal agents led them toward waiting vehicles, Elena gazed back at the hotel, silently praying that Julian's sacrifice would not be in vain, that he would somehow survive to know the daughter he had only just truly discovered. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air of Massachusetts General Hospital's IQ waiting room. Elena sat with her head bowed, still wearing her gala dress, now wrinkled and stained with Julian's blood. Beside her, Matthew kept a protective arm around her shoulders, his tuxedo jacket draped over a nearby chair. "Any news?" Special Agent Daniels approached, offering them paper cups of coffee. Elena accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. "Still in surgery, it's been 4 hours. And Sophie?" Matthew asked. "Safe at our field office with a child specialist. She's remarkably composed for a 6-year-old who's been through hell." Daniels hesitated. She's been asking for both of you, especially you, Ms. Morozov. Elena's throat tightened. I'll go to her as soon as we know about Julian. The doors to the surgical ward swung open as a tired-looking doctor emerged, removing his surgical cap. Everyone stood. Mr. Carter survived the surgery, he announced without preamble. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters, but caused significant damage to his left lung and shattered a rib, which created secondary injuries. We've repaired what we could, but the next 24 hours are critical. Can we see him? Elena asked. The doctor hesitated. He's being moved to recovery, to immediate family only, and only for a few minutes once he's stabilized. She is family, Matthew interjected. She's the aunt of his daughter. The doctor nodded warily. I'll have a nurse come get you when he's ready for visitors. No more than 5 minutes. After the doctor left, Elena turned to Agent Daniels. What happened with Leonid and Rebecca? Daniels' expression darkened. Morozov is in custody, along with 3 of his men. He's being treated for a broken collarbone and facial lacerations, courtesy of Mr. Carter. And Rebecca, in custody as well, though she's not talking. We found evidence in her possession linking her directly to Marina Morozov's disappearance. Daniels looked at her with sympathy. I'm sorry to tell you this, but among her things was a journal detailing what happened 6 years ago. Your sister didn't survive the birth. There were complications. Elena closed her eyes, a mix of grief and grim vindication washing over her. She'd known somehow that Marina was gone. Still, having it confirmed felt like losing her all over again. What will happen to Sophie now? She asked quietly. That's complicated, Daniels admitted. Julian Carter is her biological father, but given his condition and the ongoing investigation, we'll need to place her with either a relative or temporary protective custody. I'm her aunt, Elena said firmly. Her only living blood relative besides Leonid, who's headed for prison. We'll need to verify that through DNA, and there are legal processes. I can help with those, Matthew interrupted. I've already prepared the necessary paperwork for an emergency guardianship petition. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Ms. Morozov, Mr. Carter is asking for you. Julian Carter looked pale and frail against the white hospital sheets, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines that beeped softly in the dim room. His eyes fluttered open as Elena approached the bed. Elena, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophie. She's safe, Elena assured him, gently taking his hand. She's being looked after by the FBI until all this is sorted out. Relief washed over Julian's features. Thank God, he winced, the small movement clearly causing pain. Leonid, in custody. It's over, Julian. You helped bring him down. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Not how I planned to spend my evening. Elena found herself returning the smile despite everything. I think none of us expected how this would unfold. Julian's expression grew serious. I need to tell you about Marina. I know she didn't survive, Elena said gently. You don't have to, but I do, he insisted, his voice strengthening slightly. You deserve to know what she meant to me. He took a labored breath. Those 3 days in Russia weren't just an affair. I fell in love with her. Her laugh, her mind, her spirit. I'd never met anyone like her. Elena swallowed against the emotion rising in her throat. She was special. When I returned to Boston, I tried to contact her again, but she never answered. His eyes filled with regret. I didn't try hard enough if I had known she was pregnant. You couldn't have known, Elena reassured him. Julian shook his head slightly. I should have looked harder. Should have, he coughed, grimacing with pain. You need to rest, Elena said, concerned by his pallor. Not yet. Julian's grip on her hand tightened. In my office, wall safe behind the Kandinsky, combination 522-173. Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. There's a medallion for Sophie and files, evidence against Leonid. Been gathering it for months. I'll make sure Sophie gets the medallion, Elena promised. Julian's eyes locked with hers, suddenly intense despite his weakened state. The medallion has a false back, microchip inside. Everything you need. To reclaim your inheritance, Marina helped me. Understand what Leonid had done? I've been building a case, helping Interpol, even before I knew about Sophie. Elena stared at him in shock. You've been investigating Leonid all this time. Started as business intelligence, then found connections to Morozov group collapse. Suspicious deaths. Julian's breathing became more labored. When I discovered Rebecca's connection, realized the truth about Sophie, had to make it right. A nurse appeared at the doorway. Miss Morozov, I'm sorry, but the patient needs rest. Julian clutched Elena's hand with surprising strength. Promise me, take care of Sophie, tell her about Marina, and that her father loved her. I promise, Elena whispered, tears falling freely now. But you'll tell her yourself when you recover. Julian's expression told her what he couldn't say aloud, that he didn't expect to survive. The medallion was for Marina. I bought it in St. Petersburg. Never got to give it to her. Inside is a picture. Of us together, Sophie should have it. The machines began beeping more insistently as Julian's vitals fluctuated. The nurse moved forward urgently, calling for assistance. You need to leave now, she told Elena firmly. As Elena reluctantly stepped back, Julian's voice followed her, weak but determined. Elena, thank you for protecting our daughter when I couldn't. Our daughter. The words echoed in Elena's mind as she was ushered from the room. Doctors rushing in to stabilize Julian. Yao, Adam Matthew was waiting when she emerged, immediately wrapping her in his arms as she broke down in tears. Everything. The years of searching, the discovery of Sophie, the confrontation, Julian's sacrifice, crashed over her at once. He's dying, she whispered against Matthew's chest. He's dying, and he still managed to give me the final piece I need against Leonid. What do you mean? Matthew asked, leading her to a quiet corner of the waiting room. Elena explained about the medallion and the microchip. He's been investigating Leonid for months, working with Interpol. All this time I thought he was just another wealthy American businessman. And he was actually helping build the case against my uncle. That's why he was so quick to believe your story, Matthew realized. He already knew parts of it. Elena nodded, wiping away tears. We need to get to his office. The medallion isn't just a keepsake, it's evidence. Agent Daniels joined them. Having overheard the end of their conversation, I can arrange for a team to secure the safe contents immediately. I should be there, Elena insisted. Julian entrusted this to me. First, we need to get you to Sophie, Matthew said gently. She needs family right now more than anything. Elena hesitated, torn between her promise to Julian and her duty to her niece. You're right. The evidence can wait an hour. The FBI field office was a 20-minute drive from the hospital. As they approached, Elena tried to prepare herself for seeing Sophie, a child who had lost everything familiar in a single night. In a comfortable room filled with toys and books, Sophie sat drawing intently, a child specialist watching nearby. She looked up as Elena entered, her small face lighting with recognition. Elena, she cried, running to embrace her. You're still here? Elena knelt to Sophie's level, returning the hug fiercely. Of course I am. I promised I'd always be here for you, remember? Sophie pulled back, her expression suddenly solemn in a way no 6-year-olds should be. The nice lady told me Mommy did bad things and isn't coming back. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and Daddy is hurt really bad. Yes. Sweetheart, Elena answered honestly. Your daddy is in the hospital. The doctors are taking very good care of him. Are you going to take care of me now? Sophie asked with a child's directness. Elena stroked her hair, so like Marina's, and made a promise she intended to keep for the rest of her life. Yes, Sophie, I'm going to take care of you now. I'm your Aunt Elena. Your mother was my sister. My real mother. Sophie's eyes widened. The lady in my dreams. Elena nodded, tears threatening again. Her name was Marina, and she loved you very, very much. Sophie considered this with remarkable composure. Is that why you came to be my nanny? Because you're really my aunt? Yes, Elena admitted. I wanted to make sure you were safe and happy. Sophie nodded as if this made perfect sense. I knew you were special. She took Elena's hand. Can we go see Daddy now? Soon, Elena promised, marveling at the resilience of this child who had already endured more loss than most adults. Very soon, 1 year later, San Francisco sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the restored Morozov mansion, casting golden patterns across the polished hardwood floors. From the terrace, The view of San Francisco Bay was breathtaking, clear blue waters stretching toward the Golden Gate Bridge, which stood majestic against the cloudless sky. Elena stood at the railing, coffee cup in hand, watching seagulls circle over the water. A gentle breeze carried the salt scent of the ocean, mingling with the fragrance of the rose garden Marina had designed years ago, now restored to its former glory. "There you are," Matthew's voice came from behind her. He approached, wrapping his arms around her waist and placing a kiss on her neck. "Nervous?" "A little," she admitted, leaning back against him. "It's been a long road to this day." Matthew's law firm had officially opened its San Francisco branch 3 months ago. With him at the helm, though his career had flourished after the high-profile Morozov case, he'd willingly relocated to be with Elena and Sophie as they rebuilt their lives on the West Coast, far from the painful memories of Boston. "Everything's ready," he assured her. "The caterers are setting up. The flowers look beautiful, and Sophie has only changed her outfit twice this morning." Elena laughed, turning in his arms to face him. At 34, Matthew Brooks had a few more lines around his eyes than when they'd first met, but they only added character to his handsome face. Only twice. She must be maturing. The sound of small running feet interrupted them as Sophie burst onto the terrace, a vision in blue tulle and satin ribbons. "Aunt Elena, Uncle Matthew, Judge Martinez is here early," she announced, her Russian accent already evident after just a year of lessons. Elena smiled, still amazed at how quickly Sophie had adapted to the dramatic changes in her life. Children were remarkably resilient, the therapist had explained, especially when surrounded by love and stability. "We'd better not keep her waiting then," Elena replied, taking Sophie's hand. "Is your basket of rose petals ready?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "I practiced all week. I won't drop any until I reach the right spot." As they moved inside, Elena caught a glimpse of their reflection in the terrace doors. She in a simple ivory dress, Matthew in a light gray suit, and Sophie between them, blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight. They looked like a family. They were a family. The small gathering in the mansion's central garden included only their closest friends and allies from the past year. Agent Daniels, now a friend, had flown in from Boston. Nick, finally able to emerge from hiding after Leonid's conviction, stood chatting with Elena's former housekeepers from Moscow who had been located and brought to America. Matthew's parents beamed with pride near the flower-covered archway. Judge Martinez, a diminutive woman with an authoritative presence, greeted them warmly. "All the paperwork is in order," she assured Elena. "After today, it's official." Elena nodded gratefully, though the emergency guardianship had been granted easily given the circumstances. The adoption process had been more complex. Today would finalize Sophie's legal status as Sophie Morozov Brooks, uniting the 3 branches of her heritage: her mother's family name, her father's legacy, and the man who had stepped forward to be her new father. As the simple ceremony began, Elena found herself reflecting on the tumultuous year that had brought them to this moment. Julian Carter had survived against all odds, though his recovery had been long and painful. The bullet had caused damage that would never fully heal, leaving him with a pronounced limp and chronic pain. When he was finally stable enough for visitors, Sophie had been his primary concern. "I don't want to disrupt her life any more than it's already been," he had told Elena from his hospital bed. "She needs stability, not another upheaval." Together, they had worked out a compromise. Julian would remain in Sophie's life as her birth father, visiting regularly, but Elena would have primary custody. It had taken months of negotiations, DNA tests, and court appearances, but they had eventually reached an arrangement that put Sophie's well-being first. Rebecca's fate had been decided more swiftly, facing multiple federal charges including kidnapping, fraud, and accessory to murder. She had agreed to testify against Leonid in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her detailed testimony had been devastating, revealing not only the truth about Marina's death, complications during childbirth exacerbated by negligent care, but also Leonid's decades of criminal activities. 3 months after her arrest, Rebecca had been transferred to a minimum security facility to await trial. During the transfer, she had somehow slipped away from her handlers and disappeared into the Pacific Ocean, leaving behind only a suicide note and her jewelry collection in a safety deposit box designated for Sophie's future. Whether she had actually drowned or had orchestrated an elaborate escape remained a mystery. Leonid had not been so fortunate. The evidence Julian had gathered, combined with Elena's documentation and Rebecca's testimony, had created an airtight case. He was currently serving the first year of a 30-year sentence. His empire dismantled, his assets frozen across multiple continents. The medallion Julian had mentioned had proven invaluable. Inside the antique silver locket was indeed a photograph of Julian and Marina in St. Petersburg, their faces alight with happiness. More importantly, the hidden compartment had contained a microchip with encrypted files detailing Leonid's financial crimes, falsified documents, and connections to organized crime. Evidence Julian had been gathering since before he even knew of his connection to Sophie. With that evidence, Elena had been able to reclaim her family's legitimate assets. The Morozov group had been restructured under her leadership, with a focus on clean energy and ethical business practices. The mansion in San Francisco, one of the few Morozov properties that had escaped Leonid's notice, had been restored to serve as both home and headquarters for the Marina Foundation, dedicated to protecting children orphaned by corporate and political conflicts worldwide. Elena, Matthew's gentle voice brought her back to the present. Your turn. She realized Judge Martinez was looking at her expectantly. It was time for her to recite her vows. Not just wedding vows to Matthew, but also adoption vows to Sophie, binding the three of them legally as they were already bound by love. Elena took a deep breath, looking from Matthew to Sophie and back again. Today, I promise to honor the trust that both of you have placed in me, she began, her voice clear and steady. Matthew, you showed me that trust and love can exist even after betrayal. You helped me find justice without losing my humanity. I promise to be your partner, your confidant, and your friend for all the days we have together. She turned to Sophie, kneeling to meet her eyes. Sophie, you have your mother's spirit and your father's courage. I promise to protect you, guide you, and love you as my own. I promise to tell you stories of your mother and honor the sacrifice your father made for you. I promise that you will always know who you are and where you come from. Sophie's small hand reached up to touch the medallion that now hung around her neck, Julian's gift. Passed on as he had wished, inside was still the photograph of Marina and Julian, a tangible connection to her origins. As Judge Martinez pronounced them officially, family. Sophie tossed her rose petals with perfect timing, her laughter ringing out across the garden. Matthew's arms encircled Elena as their guests applauded, and for a moment, she felt Marina's presence as strongly as if her sister stood beside her. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, and Sophie had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Elena found Matthew in the library. He was examining the newly framed document on the wall, Sophie's corrected birth certificate, now reading Sophie Morozov Brooks. I had a call from Julian while you were putting Sophie to bed, Matthew said as she joined him. He's doing well with his physical therapy. Says he might be ready to visit next month if his doctors approve travel. Elena nodded, grateful for Julian's ongoing recovery. Despite their complicated history, she had developed a genuine respect for the man who had nearly died protecting his daughter. Sophie will be thrilled. She's been practicing her chess moves to show him. Matthew drew her into his arms, his expression thoughtful. You know, when you first walked into my office last year, I never imagined we'd end up here. No, Elena smiled up at him. Where did you think we'd end up? I tried not to think about it at all, he admitted. You were the most intimidating client I'd ever had. A Russian heiress disguised as a nanny, determined to take on an oligarch and one of Boston's wealthiest families simultaneously. And now you're still intimidating. He laughed, but in entirely different ways. His expression softened. What about you? Is this the ending you imagined when you first infiltrated the Carter household? Elena considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. I was so focused on justice and revenge that I never thought beyond exposing Leonid and reclaiming Sophie. I never imagined I'd find a new beginning for myself. Through the open doorway, they could see into Sophie's room, where the little girl slept peacefully, her blonde hair spread across the pillow, the medallion on her nightstand catching the moonlight. Sometimes, Elena whispered, echoing words that had come to her on another night long ago. It's necessary to lose everything to discover what truly matters. Matthew's arms tightened around her, and together they stood in comfortable silence, watching over the child who had brought them together. the living legacy of Marina Morozov and Julian Carter, and the heart of their newly formed family.